I'm Rhonda Barnes-Cloth, and I serve as WWF's Vice President of Individual Giving. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to moderate this session. And now I'm honored to introduce the experts. First, Ginette Hemley, who oversees WWF's efforts to secure a future in the wild for the world's most endangered and iconic species. During her 30-year career at WWF, Ginette has developed and launched global recovery strategies for critically endangered species, led our community-based conservation strategy, worked to eliminate the illegal wildlife trade, and mobilized large-scale public, political, and financial support for long-term species and habitat conservation. As WWF's authority on endangered species and conservation policy, Ginette has engaged key constituencies in unique partnerships to secure long-term solutions. And next, Dechen Dorji, who oversees our efforts to develop, implement, and mobilize resources for our wildlife conservation priorities in Asia. Prior to his current role, Dechen served for 7 years as WWF's country representative in Bhutan, leading a number of successful conservation initiatives. He was integral to the success of Bhutan for Life, working closely with WWF leadership and the former Bhutanese Prime Minister to raise $43 million and launching some of Bhutan's first nationwide conservation efforts for threatened species, including tigers, snow leopards, and golden mahseer. So let's start the session with Ginette Hemley. Ginette, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rhonda. It's great to see all of you today, and I'm delighted to be with you. So a century ago, there were roughly 100,000 tigers living in the wild. Rampant habitat destruction and poaching caused those numbers to plummet dramatically, as many of you know. By 2010, the global wild tiger population reached an all-time low of about 3,200 animals. With the future of wild tigers at risk, WWF joined forces with governments, organizations, and communities across the globe to achieve a bold vision to double the number of tigers in the wild by 2022, the next Chinese Lunar Year of the Tiger. As part of this initiative that we call T×2, WWF works with partners around the world and across the tiger range countries to tackle the threats to tigers and create the conditions necessary for them to recover and thrive. And there is good news. Today, after more than a century, global wild tiger numbers are actually increasing. The trend marks an important but still fragile turnaround as we continue to build momentum for long-term conservation. So today, my colleague Dechen and I are going to tell you the story of this unprecedented trend and turnaround and share with you why tiger conservation is working in the places we're seeing success, and also talk about the challenges we face, what it's going to take to overcome them. You know, and this story is actually quite unique in the world of endangered species conservation, and it's one that we hope informs and inspires other efforts to protect species on the brink. So this photo always reminds me of why tigers are special. You know, the gaze of this animal is truly hypnotizing. The photo itself is really quite extraordinary. Amazingly, this photo was taken at about 3,600 meters, almost 12,000 feet, high in the mountains of Bhutan. Beyond the composition of the photo, what it also represents is tigers in all their greatness, but also in their adaptability. Tigers are found up to 4,000 meters, which is about 13,000 feet in Bhutan. They're also found in the humid tropics of Southeast Asia and in the swamps of the Sundarbans, which are shared by India and Bangladesh, where it may get to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit day to day. And in the Russian Far East, essentially on the edge of Siberia, where it can get down to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter. But despite the tigers' incredible adaptability to different habitats, ability to survive in a wide range of habitats, this has not ensured its conservation and survival. Up until 2010, tigers were in steep decline and had reached their lowest numbers in history, possibly around 3,200 animals. But this was also a unique turning point for this big cat. Here's another way to look at the tiger's decline. The light cream area is the tiger's historic range going back a century or more. You can see the species once occurred widely across Asia. The red area is where tigers have become extinct or are extirpated from their range in recent decades due to habitat loss and overhunting and poaching. The yellow is where we find tigers today. Overall, we've seen a more than 95% decline in the tiger's range over the past 150 years or so. But something important happened in 2010. WWF helped sound the alarm that if this trend continued, surely tigers would start blinking out and become extinct in the wild. Something had to change. Something had to bring tiger conservation onto a new political footing. And that happened in 2010, the last Chinese Year of the Tiger. That year, there was a unique coming together of governments and NGOs, donors and citizens in a summit that was held in St. Petersburg, Russia. And that summit was attended by several heads of state from Asian countries and other world leaders. And they agreed to two things. First, they agreed to a time-bound goal. They said, by 2022, the next Chinese Year of the Tiger, we have to achieve something big. And that led to the second thing, which was to try to double the number of tigers in the wild from around the 3,200 to over 6,000 by 2022. So a time-bound specific goal was set, and the idea of what we call T times 2, doubling the number of tigers in the wild, was born. But why tigers? Why did the world come together around this particular species? There are so many other endangered species, including a lot of other megafauna, that have not resulted in the same kind of attention. There is indeed something unique about this cat that has grabbed world attention. Well, for millennia, tigers have really just dazzled man, and man has been fixated by the image. It appears as an image in cave art, it appears in modern art, it appears in temple design, and you can find many temples across Asia that have tigers festooned as art across the different temples. It's also transferred into modern day marketing as an image. The tiger is, as it happens to be, the most popular mascot across amateur and professional sports teams in the US. So there really is something about this image. Occasionally, this image has also been to the tiger's detriment. The symbol of power that the tiger represents has also created a major threat. The use of certain products like the bones of tigers in traditional Asian medicine has created a huge illegal market for many tiger products. But there's also something else about this tiger that's important. It's an apex predator, as you all will know, and as such, it has an outsized influence on the ecosystem in which it lives. Many of you may know about the top-down effects of wolves in Yellowstone when they began to be reintroduced back in the early 1990s. And like wolves, tigers control the number of prey species within an area, but also the number of predators. If you remove the tiger, there can be a significant cascading impact, like the explosion of certain hoofed animals that are the tiger's prey, which can in turn greatly alter the vegetation and plant composition in an ecosystem. You can also get an explosion in the number of small carnivores when the tiger is removed. And on the flip side, when you conserve tigers, you conserve a whole host of other species and ecosystem functions. Protecting a tiger successfully results in the protection on average of around 25,000 hectares of forest. And when we protect forests, we protect all the benefits those forests provide through the biodiversity that is important for the sustenance and livelihoods of local communities. And protecting these forests also helps conserve important watersheds that provide drinking water to literally millions of people across Asia. And it helps secure the carbon that is concentrated in many of these rich forests that was touched on in the last session. So tigers provide a critical ecosystem function. But one of the challenges facing the tiger as a large predator is that it has to live in one of the most densely populated parts of the planet from a human perspective. Inside this circle are all the world's wild tigers, and more people live inside this circle than outside of it. It's quite remarkable when you think about it. And so any conservation strategy has to involve people. And if we want to have a world with wild tigers, or for that matter, orangutans, pandas, or snow leopards, which are also found only within this circle, then we have to have strategies that include people as part of the mix. So how are we doing? How are we doing across the landscapes in which WWF is working? So the green areas on this chart and map represent places that tiger numbers are increasing. As you can see, we've got a good bit of green on this chart, and that's the good news. The yellow is where tiger numbers are stabilized, and the red is where we've seen reductions in tigers over the last 10 to 15 years. That's the problem area. So as part of today's talk, we're going to take you to the green zone in the Terai Arc, which is shared by India and Nepal. Then we're going to take you to the red zone to Malaysia, where tiger numbers have declined and continue to decline, we believe. And then we're going to take you to Bhutan to tell you about the uniqueness of tiger conservation in that country. So let's go to Nepal. So Nepal is the highest place on Earth, with Mount Everest on its northern border with China, and the southern border region lies the Terai Arc grasslands that are shared with India. In these extremely fertile grasslands that are fed by the glacial waters of the Himalayas, we have some extraordinarily beautiful and important areas for tiger conservation. Based on 2018 figures, the number of tigers in Nepal is 235. What this represents is a near doubling of tigers over a 10-year period. And if we just take a look at the graph on the far left at the top, that's Bardia National Park. In 2008, the estimated number of tigers was around 18 animals. 10 years later, that population of tigers had shot up to 87. So not T times 2 or even T times 3, but more like T times 4. It's quite incredible. Also in neighboring Banki National Park, which is depicted on the far right of the graph, those bars on the right, which was only created about 10 years ago as a park, there were 0 tigers there in 2008. And here we've seen an incredible recovery of tigers as well. So clearly, Nepal has a formula for tiger conservation. Something is really working here. What are the reasons for that? Well, one of the reasons is what we call connectivity conservation. All of these important protected areas are linked east and west and north, south, and also with India on the southern border. So in this map, kind of a busy map, you can see Bardia National Park at the top of the slide and Katarnagat Wildlife Sanctuary in India on the bottom, on the southern side. But the most important part I want to talk about is that strip in the middle in the yellow circle. This is the Kata corridor. The red dots in the map are where camera traps for tigers have been set. The black dots are where tiger images have been captured. This corridor is about 2 kilometers wide, about 18 kilometers long. 20 years ago, it was an area that was devoid of tigers, and in fact, it was devoid of trees. But over the 20-year period, this area has been restored and reforested through the work of local communities and with the support of WWF and the Nepal government. As a result of this successful reforestation, something extraordinary has happened here. Not only did this corridor begin allowing tigers to move from the north to the south and vice versa, but the tigers also stayed in it. This is a photo of a tigress with 3 cubs that bred here in the last 2 to 3 years and stayed within the corridor. So new habitat for tigers was actually created and tigers began living in it. But being a narrow area, it is quite close to where people also live. How is it possible for tigers to live so close to people? Well, there are a whole range of conditions that are needed to make this possible. First of all, you have to build trust with the local communities. Second, you have to have, you've got to target your conservation work in areas that need it most. And one of the big challenges we have generally in our wildlife conservation work these days is addressing human-wildlife conflict, such as crop raiding by elephants or the killing of livestock by predators like tigers. And for tigers, this challenge is increasing, especially as we're seeing tiger recovery. In the case of Nepal, we've also closely monitored human-wildlife conflict incidents and developed solutions appropriate to the circumstances. These include some of the activities you see in this slide, such as installing predator-proof fencing, building secure enclosures where goats and other livestock can be kept safe at night, and using solar paneled electric fencing to stop crop raiding by elephants and other species. Responses also include recruiting community rangers, both to track the movement of wildlife, but also to help prevent any damaging incursions. But it's important to look beyond these responses as just a series of activities. Let's look at some of the metrics. So what's actually happened here? So in the top left-hand graph, you can see that the human population of Nepal has increased over time, not surprisingly. And at the same time, the tiger population has also increased. It's gone from a low about 95 animals to the 235 I mentioned previously. And normally, you'd expect to see with an increasing human population and an increasing tiger population, an increase in the levels of tiger-human conflicts. But that is indeed what happened up until about 2012. There was a peak in recorded tiger-human conflicts, as you can see in the graph on the right side, but then those incidents declined. And the reason that levels of conflict declined is because of the actions mentioned previously, including the trust that came from that with the local communities and their involvement in tiger conservation. So Nepal is living proof that it is possible to live with a large predator, such as the tiger. Now I'm going to go to the red zone, to the area on the map that I showed where tiger conservation is not resulting yet in success in terms of tiger numbers. So we have a crisis in Southeast Asia. The crisis is largely the result of snaring. You can see in this picture a large number of snares. They are made from simple wires like bicycle cable. They're usually affixed to one side of a tree or a stake when they're used with a simple hook on the other side, and either the foot or the neck of the animal gets caught in it. Snares are cheap to make. They're also easy to transport. It's possible to carry several dozen in a small backpack, and they are completely indiscriminate when used. Even if the poacher is trying to capture something like a wild pig, once a snare is set, absolutely anything can walk into it, including a tiger. We believe that the reason that tigers are now extinct in Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos is because of the widespread and indiscriminate use of wire snares. In Malaysia, there was for many decades a reasonably healthy number of tigers. And you can see on the bar chart on the left here, in 2009, 2010, there were over 30 tigers in Royal Belem National Park. But the monitoring of tiger numbers in the following 5 years showed a population crash. Numbers were halved from around 30 to about 14. Clearly something was going terribly wrong. At the same time, patrols were reporting an increased number of snares found. What the graph on the right depicts is the snare level was increasing over that same period. So tiger numbers were going down as the number of snares detected was increasing. We had a real problem here that we had to address if we were going to change the situation. So in the absence of direct government action, what WWF in Malaysia did was to create community patrol teams with the government's permission that went into the forest with the sole purpose of removing these wire snares. Snares, as you can imagine, are extremely hard to find. You need a tough, hardy group of trackers. 10 community groups were set up for this to go into the forest, and over a period of time, they collected snares, removing large numbers of them from the park. It's really challenging work. It requires spending a lot of time in the forest looking for something that is hard to find. But it paid off. As you can see on this active snare index, there was a peak of snares found and then a decline. And as of 2019, patrols did not find any active snares in this particular forest. So it was very effective at removing a direct threat to tigers in this area. In the case of Malaysia, WWF stepped in where the government wasn't doing enough. And in fact, the Malaysian government has been a persistent challenge for many years when it comes to tiger conservation. They simply have not prioritized it. But fortunately, that may be changing. Because of the crisis at hand and because of outside pressure, new commitments for increasing patrolling across the country have been made. The government's allocated a new budget for this. They've also drafted a plan to address the tiger crisis. And importantly, The government will be hosting later this year an important meeting that will bring together ministers from around the region to address the crisis in the so-called red zone, which we hope will be the first step in developing a regional recovery plan for tigers. So why are tigers snared in the first place? Well, the primary reason is for the illegal trade, which remains the most immediate threat to tigers and their survival in the wild. In spite of global protection through the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or CITES, tiger products continue to be traded illegally. Here you see 2 tiger skins that were seized by Russian enforcement officials in the Russian Far East. It's not only the skin that's valued, other body parts, such as the bones, as I mentioned earlier, are used in traditional medicines and health tonics, where they purportedly have healing properties for ailments like arthritis. Fortunately, the Chinese government has officially banned the use of wild tiger products, but there are loopholes in the law, and the illegal trade persists. One of the complicating factors is the huge number of tigers maintained in captivity in China, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, in particular, on what we call tiger farms. This is a so-called tiger farm in China. These are facilities that are largely commercial in nature and which hold and breed tigers indiscriminately, mainly for entertainment. Visitors pay to see them. It's sort of like a glorified zoo. Tigers have a relatively fast reproductive rate for a large mammal, which is a good thing for getting them to recover in the wild, but it's not such a good thing for keeping tigers in unnatural conditions in captivity. And on these tiger farms, tiger products such as health tonics are often sold on their premises. At least 8,000 tigers that we know of are held in tiger farms across the 4 countries I'd mentioned, primarily being China at the top of the list. The challenge is that tigers that are captive bred are often exempt from prohibitions on keeping and trading wild tigers. Because it is almost impossible to distinguish products from captive versus wild tigers, these tiger farms can serve as a cover for trade in wild tiger products, which complicates enforcement and also confuses consumers. So one of our top priorities at WWF is to end tiger farming, and it's been a big challenge. But it's not only China and other Asian countries where we see challenges with captive tigers. So we here in the US have our own captive tiger problem, which was highlighted in the very sensational way by last year's Netflix hit Tiger King. Right now, there may be around 5,000 tigers in the US, most of which are privately owned and often exposed to forced public interactions, cub petting, entertainment playtimes, photo ops, things like that visitors will pay to do. Only a small percentage of tigers in captivity in the US are maintained in zoos that are accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, the AZA, or other facilities where agencies, where welfare and conservation are prioritized. Because no single government agency regulates who owns, trades, or sells these animals, it's easy for tigers and their parts to slip into illegal global trade, which once again continues to be a big threat to tigers in the wild. You may have seen this news item a couple of weeks ago, the raid by the Department of Justice of a facility in Oklahoma and the seizure of more than 60 big cats, live big cats, mostly tigers, for improper care and breeding. There are efforts underway now, fortunately, to address the current loopholes and patchwork of federal, state, and local laws regulating the ownership of tigers in captivity in the US. And recently, so some good news, the Big Cat Public Safety Act was introduced into both the House and the Senate. This is really good news in that it's going to provide uniformity in the law around captive tiger ownership and will require owners and facilities to obtain a federal license. It will also prevent, if passed, any public contact with tiger cubs and other cubs of big cats, which removes one of the main incentives for continuous breeding. Once passed, and we're pressing hard for that, the Big Cat Public Safety Act will also make it easier to track and monitor captive tigers in the US so they don't end up being traded illegally and sold in the black market, which will help us reduce the threat to the tigers in the wild. Politically, I'll add it's really important for the US to take action, as it's hard for us as a country to be critical of countries like China when we have a problem in our own backyard. Well, let's now go back to the field and some other good news. We're going to go now to Bhutan, where there has been success of a different type, And Dechen is going to tell you all about that now. So over to you, Dechen.
Yes, thank you, Ginette. You may have seen this iconic image, the famous tiger temple precariously perched on a huge cliff in Bhutan. And of course, legend says that back in the 8th century, Guru Padmasambhava, the second Buddha who brought Buddhism to Bhutan, flew on the back of a tigress and meditated in that cave for 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. And a few hundred years later, the temple was built to commemorate these enlightened teachings that promoted the protection of all sentient beings. And now, 1,200 years later, on a cold winter day in 2015, this video of a healthy tigress was caught in a camera trap with 3 cubs along the northern ridges of this famous tiger temple. And what I would love to share here is that, these legends of tigers come alive in Bhutan in these places of worship every now and then, inspiring hope and future for the last remaining tigers in the wild. This is another picture, a camera trap picture, again taken in mid of 2020 last year. And here you have another healthy tigress that was first recorded during the National Tiger Survey in 2014 and reappeared after 7 years, this time in one of the important biodiversity corridors. And this time she showed up with, again, 3 healthy cubs playfully following her. And this keeps getting better. Here's another exciting and rare video footage of a tiger mom with 4 healthy cubs that was recorded in 2019 in one of the most important tiger conservation sites in central Bhutan. Generally, the mortality rate for wild tigers in the first 2 years of their life is very high, at least around 50%. So to see an image like this in the wild with 4 healthy cubs is simply heartwarming and a very encouraging sign of the health of tigers in Bhutan. The presence of healthy and breeding tigers and their cubs surviving to maturity is really a good indicator of not just their survival, but also of the abundance of prey and the quality of their habitat. So in Bhutan, tigers have really been an integral part of our nation's spiritual and cultural heritage. The symbolisms, the mysticisms, and tigers' stories permeates in our day-to-day lives from the subtropical jungles in the south to all the way up in the northern Himalayas. The tiger is, here you can see in the picture, is popularly worshipped as one of 4 protective deities in Bhutanese folklore and mythology. And as locally we call them Takseng Chungdu, meaning amongst the 4 animals, tiger is the only animal that is a real depiction, and the other 3 are mythical animals, the Garuda, the snow lion, and the dragon. And the belief in Bhutan is that the tiger was placed in that group for a very good reason, that because the tiger represents our sacred conscience, that connects our world of reality with the realm of the spirituality and the heavens above. So tigers are really often held with such reverence in my country that even when your livestock is killed by a tiger, it is considered very disrespectful to vent and shout back at the tiger. But of course, in this day and age, for poor farmers, it's pretty hard act to follow. So this is the story of Bhutan's tigers, part of the green zone that Ginette just showed earlier, where we are seeing rising number of tigers in the wild. For instance, the Royal Manas National Park, the oldest park in the country, has more than doubled its wild tiger numbers since 2010. And we continue to see record new sightings from that park. And here in this picture, as you can see, this is from Royal Manas National Park. And all these results really takes, I just wanted to show that, it really takes a lot of hard work, effort, and sacrifice on the part of the park staff. Some of them, these rangers live away from their families for months, patrolling the parks, surveying and monitoring, and often risking their lives on a daily basis. So these results are very good, but at the same time, it really comes at a huge effort from these some of our colleagues, amazing colleagues out in the field. And I was fortunate to be with them a few years ago in the park as well. So it's really particularly tough, especially during the monsoon, to patrol these parks in sort of malaria-infested forest. I will now briefly share the story of Bhutan for Life Fund that Ginette mentioned, and its continuing support for tiger conservation in Bhutan. Bhutan's remarkable commitment to conservation, as you all might know, and decades of partnership with WWF really led to the launch of this ambitious project Finance for Permanence funding mechanism back in 2014. It's an innovative conservation financing approach that leverages and uses blended finance to address the perpetual challenges of mobilizing long-term financing for the effective management of protected areas in countries like ours. And this innovative and ambitious project raised $43 million to be invested over a 14-year period for all the national parks of Bhutan, was really made possible because of the generosity and goodwill of friends and supporters like yourself, foundations, and several multilateral agencies who really all came together, inspired by the unique story of Bhutan's tigers and its remarkable network of protected areas and its biological corridors. The wildlife corridor that you can see here in the map in sort of light brownish color connecting all the national parks covers about 9% of the country's area. And this was established back in 1999 as a gift to the Earth program from the people of Bhutan. And I felt this is such a beautiful story in itself because a poor country like Bhutan, struggling nation, gifting 9% of its pristine land, biodiverse, rich land for the benefit of the global community and our future generations is really a beautiful story and great commitment. And Bhutan's tiger heartlands, they really are embedded within this incredible network of protected areas, and they are increasingly proving to be important tiger source sites and enabling tiger movement and dispersal both within and beyond its borders with India as well. And these protected areas are about almost 52% of the country's area, and Bhutan currently has about 72% forest cover. And Bhutan for Life Fund really is now providing the much needed resources to fund these tiger conservation programs in the protected areas on an annual and a sustainable basis. For a fund of this size, getting the right process of institutionalization and legitimacy was very important, particularly to ensure high levels of transparency and accountability. So therefore, obtaining a strong legal framework to protect the fund and its mechanisms became a critical need for all the parties and the donors involved in the process. And in a historic move, this was resolved with the proclamation of the Royal Charter by the King himself, and it was specifically issued for the management of the fund. And the Royal Charter also provided the much needed assurance of the government to allocate their share of the funding commitment to achieve the jointly agreed milestones and conservation goals that was part of the conservation plan drawn up for the fund as well. Just in the last 3 years, Bhutan made significant gains in implementation of the National Tiger Action Plan with consistent support, financial support from this transition fund. And Bhutan also managed to establish its first tiger research center with financial support from the fund. And this center is now leading the design and execution of Bhutan's second nationwide tiger population survey, which will be rolled out in the fall of this year. And this is the first wildlife research center wholly dedicated to the study of tigers and aims to become a center of excellence in the field of tiger research and conservation by working with various experts and organizations from tiger range countries and beyond. The center will also work on advocacy, communications, and educational programs, and it will also house the permanent secretariat of the CATS Council, which is the Conservation Assured Tiger Standards that we are rolling out across all the tiger range countries. So, initiatives like Bhutan for Life, the Amazon region's protected areas, popularly called ARPA, and Costa Rica Forever that you may have heard of, really inspired and created the momentum for this ambitious Earth for Life program at WWF. And I think by working with partners, scaling our conservation ambition, and venturing into the world of impactful finance, we have now forged major deals for innovative and sustainable financing to protect, to expand, and sustainably manage some of the incredible protected areas and community and indigenous managed lands across countries like Namibia, Peru, Colombia, and Mongolia, and many more. As we all know, the scale of environmental destruction that's taking place around the world truly demands an extraordinary and transformative solutions, and ambitious large-scale financing initiatives like these provides the right solutions at scale for countries that are struggling to find resources for basic developmental programs, but they hold some of the most biodiverse regions on the planet. So next year, 2022, is the year of the tiger, the year of the Chinese, the Lunar New Year tiger. And it's a very special year for tiger conservation community because for the first time, as Ginette also mentioned, since a century of decline of tiger numbers, we will be reporting a slightly positive trend in the number of tigers in the wild. However, as Ginette noted earlier, we do recognize that these gains are still very fragile and have not been uniform across Asia's sub-regions. Unfortunately, tigers are no longer present and are now considered almost functionally extinct extinct in the vast forest of Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. And this is mainly because of the indiscriminate and ruthless industrial scale snaring, that's impacting now over 700 species of mammals are generally to be blamed for the extirpation of tigers from these countries and other wildlife as well. Currently, the estimates is that, just in 3 countries, in Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia, in the national parks of those 3 countries, there are about almost 12 million snares being laid out right now. For the range countries, tigers are not just the endangered big cats, but they have also become now political animals, associated with national identity, pride, and cultural symbolisms. Countries like India, they really take great pride in their tiger population. And the governments of range countries, sometimes they often have the tendency to exaggerate the wins and downplay some of these critical challenges and shortfalls. So under these often challenging circumstances, I think NGOs like ourselves are playing an increasingly important role in validating and communicating and providing the necessary rigor for independent monitoring and reporting against commonly agreed standards and approaches for estimating wild tiger numbers. And also, of course, helping mobilize the much needed resources for tiger conservation across all these range countries. So can we attain the goal of TX2, doubling the number of tigers in the wild next year as we had agreed back in 2010? I think in terms of the numbers, we know that countries like India, with a population of 1.3 billion people, already achieved the target of doubling the wild tiger numbers from a low of about 1,411 tigers in 2006 to the latest figures reaching 2,967 wild tigers in 2018, after carrying out the world's largest camera trap survey for a single species, covering the area the size of Norway. India will also be reporting new updated population estimates in 2022, and we are confident that the new numbers will be even higher, hopefully. India is home to 70% of the global wild tiger population. So really what happens in India is important for the overall global tiger recovery program. India's story is, of course, particularly very inspiring because despite its massive size and population, they managed to commit resources and garner political will and leadership right from the level of the Prime Minister himself. Nepal, Bhutan, Russia, and Bangladesh are all gearing up to announce their latest tiger population estimates in 2022. As I mentioned earlier, Bhutan will be rolling out a second nationwide tiger survey in the fall of this year. And hopefully, there will be more tigers than there were in 2010, and will call for very cautious celebrations in these regions. So far, tiger data from the National Service and annual monitoring programs from the Green Zone, mainly South Asia, are looking promising. But the final count in 2022 for all the range states may not reach 6,000 or TX2 goal, but certainly very close. I think we will be very close to that target. But certainly very challenging to bend the curve for a highly endangered species like the tiger, who was close to the brink of extinction in 2010, just 11 years ago. So I think just managing to bend the curve slightly is a huge achievement in itself. So as we approach the next year of the tiger in 2022, I think there is an imminent need not only to find greater means and partnerships to scale their ambitions in expanding their range, improve habitat connectivity, and promote greater transboundary collaboration. And of course, more importantly, to also find meaningful livelihood opportunities for many communities, thousands of communities and local people who live besides the tiger on a day-to-day basis. Tigers are on the move, and these two pictures pictures of the same tiger are from Bhutan. One was taken at 150 meters in the Royal Manas National Park along the border with India, and the other was taken at around 3,800 meters in the Northern Territory. As I mentioned in my earlier slides, Bhutan's biological corridors are playing a very important role in ensuring good connectivity and enabling dispersal and range expansion of tigers. Tigers, as we all know, need large home range and space to move for their survival. But one of the biggest challenges of tiger habitat management is ensuring adequate and safe connectivity of both protected and non-protected areas in the midst of increasing infrastructure expansion and habitat fragmentation. Current wildlife connectivity in many of the range countries are simply not large enough, and in many range countries, most habitats are still very fragmented and isolated. This is an interesting caricature map drawn by a local cartoonist in India, showing the importance of wildlife corridors and the threats posed by a new highway in the famous Kanha Pench Tiger Reserve in Madhya Pradesh in central India. This illustrative map shows the corridors being used by tigers and other threatened species, and also the local tribes, the local tribes called Pardi and Gond, who depend on it for their subsistence and livelihoods. And then these initiatives, we have to be very creative in sometimes to promote these initiatives because these are very effective for advocacy and communication programs, especially with the younger generation, in conveying the important messages of habitat connectivity and reducing human-tiger conflicts. Long-term studies increasingly show that protecting large apex predators like the tiger, connectivity conservation is highly critical. Studies have shown that wildlife corridors increase their effective movement and dispersal between habitats patches by 50% more compared to patches that are not connected by corridors. So these connectivity design and approaches are very necessary to increase the resilience of our tiger populations and to maintain the natural ecology and behavior of tigers for long-term persistence. So this brings us back to the importance of understanding tiger range expansion and its role in our ambitious recovery efforts for the next 12 years past 2022. Tigers currently occupy less than 4.5% of the historic range depicted by the pink shades in the map here. We are currently working with our partners and counterparts from the government of range countries to assess opportunities for tiger range expansion across the entire range. And if successful, I think these new range expansion areas could support an additional 5,000 tigers with a density of almost 1.5 tigers per 100 square kilometers, and hopefully double the current range by 2050. So modeling potential for tiger range expansion can also be valuable in meeting area-based targets under the new 30 by 30 initiative to protect 30% of the planet's wild places by 2030. These long-term conservation goals are currently being discussed for the deliberations at the 2022 Tiger Summit in Vladivostok. And we really hope that the governments will commit to further expansion of tiger range and enhance connectivity of habitats of the existing range also for the larger benefit of the ecosystem and as well. Amongst all the countries that are being considered for reintroduction, Kazakhstan is currently in the most advanced stage for Amur tiger reintroduction. Tigers have been extinct there for almost close to 100 years. And the ambitious tiger reintroduction program was started off with an MOU signed between Kazakhstan's government and WWF, followed by the creation of a huge reserve of about 415,000 hectares 4 years ago. Russian government has also agreed to donate wild Amur tigers from the Far East and will be released in the wild, if all goes well, by 2024. And probably about 10-20 tigers will be released between 2024 to 2028. This is a quick video showing us an example of a successful tiger translocation program that has been in the works for many years, and goes to show what is possible when we have all the enabling conditions in place. One male and one female tiger were successfully translocated from Corbett Tiger Reserve, the oldest tiger reserve in India, to Rajaji Tiger Reserve on the west side of it just a few weeks ago. This is from India. This was part of a recovery plan to re-establish a breeding population of tigers in the western part of the Rajaji Tiger Reserve in the state of Uttarakhand, along the foothills of the Himalayas. The western part of the the Rajaji Tiger Reserve provides a tremendous opportunity to recover the tiger population, given that wild ungulates occur at high densities there. Scientific modeling has also indicated that with sustained recovery efforts involving habitat restoration, strengthened monitoring, effective community and corridor management, close to 30 tigers can thrive in that park. And in the Rajaji Tiger Reserve, we haven't seen any successful breeding tigers since 2006. So this translocation program would really help for tiger population recovery in that reserve as well. The tigers that were translocated from Corbett to Rajaji Tiger Reserve were fitted with radio collars and are now currently being regularly monitored to help these managers to gain a better understanding of their utilization of the new range, their territorial dynamics, and adaptive ecology of these individuals. So reiterating, Ginette's remarks, well-managed tiger landscapes can really generate concrete economic and social benefits, especially for the poorer communities who live alongside the tiger reserves. They can be a vital safety net for local communities by providing access to sustainable natural resources and other ecotourism-based employment and related opportunities for income generation. Protected areas for tigers can help save much of Asia's amazing wildlife. For instance, take, for example, the India-Bhutan Manas Trans-Boundary Conservation Area, popularly called TRAMCA, where tiger populations are increasing. In addition to tigers, the grasslands and the forests of the Manas Tiger Reserve now support the endangered Asian elephants, the Asian water buffalo, the critically endangered golden langur, and over 200 species of birds. So tiger conservation is really helping drive the large-scale area-based conservation agenda in these countries as well. We have come a long way since the landmark Tiger Summit in 2010 in St. Petersburg, Russia. The political will generated at the time was truly unprecedented back in 2010. And the immense support and goodwill we have received through the years from friends and supporters like yourself were really instrumental in our collective efforts to recover the population of tigers in the wild. And next year, we hope in the upcoming Tiger Summit in 2022 that we will continue to generate the much needed support and commitment from the governments and partners for an even more ambitious vision for the next 12 years and beyond. So in closing, on behalf of all of us at WWF, I would like to thank you all for your continued support and friendship. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ginette and Dechen, for sharing this important and inspiring work. While there's still a lot of work to be done, because of your efforts and the efforts of countless others, we're making amazing progress. Our first question is for Ginette, and it looks like a theme. I think we've combined a couple of questions here. What can be done to mitigate or stop demand for tiger parts? And you did raise this, but maybe a little bit more, if you could explain if there's anything that can be done to halt inhumane tiger farms.
Yeah, that's a really good couple of questions, and certainly both are at the top of our minds. So demand for the products that tigers are often used in their body parts, such as bones. We have been working with partners in a couple of places, China included, to do a couple of things. We have engaged leaders within the traditional Chinese and Asian medicine community to advocate for the removal of tiger products from the official pharmacopoeia of China. That has actually happened, and that has had some impact. But it did take sort of going into the inside to get within the government from the influential voices. We worked with partners here on the US side to do that. So that was one step that I think has helped. The complicating thing, as I mentioned, and as you alluded to in the question, is this loophole in the Chinese law, which allows captive tigers to be held and bred, and that has led to this problem of the products being sold on the premises. We have to close that loophole, and so that's just going to take more pressure on the Chinese government to do that. That's linked to the larger issue, and part of the second question is to get those farms shut down. It's a tricky issue in China. There are political forces within the government that have a vested interest in some of those farms. It's made it complicated, but we are continuing to push forward and try to find, again, I think getting to the influential voices and maybe non-traditional partners in China who can help us influence the government in that regard. So that's one part of it. We're also taking lessons from some of our successful work around elephant ivory that some of you may be aware of, where we have used developed some innovative approaches to reducing demand by first learning about the demographics around who's buying. In that case, it was ivory, so that we understand sort of who is buying, who's motivated to buy ivory, elephant ivory, and what would it take to get them to stop buying it or wanting to buy it. We're taking some of those lessons and applying it on the tiger side of things as well, and we need to do more of that and invest more to get after what is a long-term issue of getting rid of that demand.
Thanks for that, Ginette. Dechen, over to you. We have a question about why you think countries like India are doing much better with increasing tiger numbers than countries who have decreasing tiger numbers.
Yeah, that's a good question. And as I mentioned, I think, in the tiger conservation, one of the most important factor is, of course, leadership and commitment. And I think, India, of course, India also, as I mentioned, it has the 70% of global tiger population. So to begin with, they have a much bigger tiger population. But in India, I think the single biggest factor has been the support from the government themselves. And this was started back during Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister's time, when she established the first National Tiger Conservation Authority. And ever since, they've had a very consistent approach in terms of managing these over 51 tiger reserves now. In fact, actually, they just added a new tiger reserve just last year. They had 50 tiger reserves. So that political commitment has been very strong in India. And also, and in the other parts of, in the Southeast Asia region, I think we have not seen that level of commitment from the government and partners as well. So I think in India, the success is mainly because of that. And of course, with that, then Indian was also very open to collaborating and working with NGOs, both international and local NGOs as well. And then they also have a very strong community-led initiatives where communities also play a very important role in terms of tiger support. But in the other region, we have not seen that level of support.
Could I just add to what Dechen said, just to emphasize this point? I think it's no coincidence that I would say the 5 countries where we're seeing some of the most positive trends for tigers, and that would be India, of course, and Dechen has mentioned that, Bhutan, Nepal, Russia, and China. We have commitments politically at the highest levels to tiger conservation. We do not have those same commitments in countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, although hopefully Malaysia is changing. So political will is an absolutely critical ingredient in successful tiger conservation.
Great, thanks for that added point, Ginette. Ginette, actually, I'm going to come back to you. Regarding Nepal, is it possible that the population fluctuations within different parks are due to migration rather than contained growth or contraction?
Migration of tigers or people?
I think we're talking about tigers.
Okay. Yes. I mean, I think there is, and Dechen can certainly add to this because he knows the field well, both Bhutan and Nepal. Because of the significance of the connections between those parks, you do see some flux and change. In fact, recently our team in Nepal has looked at tiger numbers kind of going up and down a bit in Chitwan National Park, which is the biggest and probably most famous park in Nepal. And we believe that some of the downward trend there is linked to movement to other parks. So yes, you see that movement, which is why it's important to be able to monitor in all those areas and have those connecting corridors, because it's the holistic connections among the network of protected areas that is so important for a healthy population. And you're going to see those fluxes.
Great.
Yes, I think that also just to add quickly, as Ginette mentioned, I think for Bhutan and Nepal, one of the unique features is that the connectivity of these tiger habitats. So as a result of that, we are seeing movement of tigers, but also we are seeing establishment of those cubs we've been monitoring and establishing new territories in places as well, both within the corridors and beyond the corridors. And as we have indicated, both in Nepal and Bhutan, we have been spotting tigers right up at over 3,000 meters elevation, and also as a result of good prey abundance, prey availability. I think these are really helping tigers to establish and sort of their movement in these different habitats.
And I think just to point out that long-term monitoring is also what's really important, right? Yep. Year to year, you might see some ups and downs, but if you're going to see a continued decline over a decade or more, you've got a problem, right? So that's why we really do put a lot of emphasis on monitoring.
So speaking of monitoring, there's a great question about that either of you can field. How are tigers counted? How are these surveys conducted? Is it all through camera traps?
Dechen, that's probably for you.
Yeah, so I think initially before the availability of camera traps, we used to do track support and line transact surveys and sign surveys as well. But now with the availability of camera traps and the cost of camera traps going down, so we do spatial capture recapture models with these camera traps. So most of the tigers are being counted through. By using camera traps, by setting up, using a proper sampling design across all the habitats where tigers are known to exist. And then, so camera traps are used to count the tigers. And tigers, as we know, every individual has different stripes, so we can count them. And normally, we count tigers that are cubs that are above 1 year old as one individual. So they are counted through camera traps.
Thank you. And Ginette, this question appears to be for you. How many tiger subspecies are there? And are there differences important for conservation?
Today, scientists recognize two subspecies: the continental tiger, which is all of the mainland areas, the majority of the tigers range, and the Sunda subspecies, which is essentially the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, the Sumatran tiger. There's been a lot of debate over the years as to how many tiger subspecies there are and how unique each of these so-called subspecies are. But we follow guidance of scientists of the IUCN, who came out maybe 3 years ago with this new determination that there are two subspecies. I think, given the current the current scientific sort of direction, what is important for us with the two subspecies, you got the Sumatran tiger is in very, very serious decline and is struggling on the island of Sumatra. And because it has been designated as a unique subspecies, it's got unique attributes, unique characteristics that we want to ensure are preserved. And so that elevates it as a priority in the larger conservation picture.
That's great. So as we sort of wrap up here, one question that I know I've asked you both before, but I promise this is not a question for me. Will Tea Times 2 continue after 2022? And what's the next goal? Will we aim to double the number of tigers again?
I'll let Dechen start and then I'll add.
Yeah, so very interesting question and very important as well as we reach this important milestone. We actually have begun the process of getting a group of conservation NGOs together, and we are actually developing a vision beyond 2022 and hopefully submitting that vision because GTF Global Tiger Forum is an intergovernmental process, and this is led by the governments of the range countries. So we will be submitting this vision from the NGO side, looking at what needs to be done beyond the next 12 years. Certainly, we want to continue this. We have to continue this work because, not just doubling. I think we need to treble and fourth. We really have to increase the tiger numbers significantly across the range states. So one area, of course, is keeping the focus on increasing the tiger numbers, but also focusing on some of the enabling conditions, both on a biophysical aspect, but also on the policy conditions as well. So this is something, so we definitely would like to keep that pressure moving. But in terms of going forward for the next 12 years, we are proposing some very even site-specific, site-based interventions that needs to be monitored, and also looking at, monitoring our progress, not just wait for the 12 years, but have some kind of intermediary evaluation system, maybe every 3 years, every 4 years, so that we can seriously review this progress with the range countries. And also range expansion, as I mentioned in my presentation, is very important. So that's something we are proposing. Our colleagues are already working on using, satellite imagery, using human modification index and all kinds of data, spatial data, and seeing where are the areas that can be expanded. But we need to take into account the political, the ecological, the social conditions that will determine the success of range expansion as well. So range expansion is an important priority within that vision, but certainly tiger numbers will be moving beyond 12 years.
I would just add, this is a long-term endeavor, and we've learned It's taken 12 years, 11 years to get to this point of, reaching really an important and powerful milestone. Tiger numbers are going up overall, and we will be, getting close to that 6,000 number, if not at it exactly in 2022. So it's all, that's all good, but it takes time, and we have to stick with it. And as Dechen emphasized, not just focusing on the numbers, which are a critical indicator, and we will continue to monitor those. The range and the habitat are absolutely important. Range expansion, protecting the habitat, and finding the sustainable financing mechanisms to ensure that tigers are protected over the long term.
And Rhonda, just to briefly add, I think, other thing that's also being discussed is how do you bring the conservation of tigers within the larger narrative of green development, within the larger narrative of area-based targets, with the larger narrative of biodiversity and climate targets and SDGs as well. So we are sort of getting more engagement in these discussions and seeing how tiger can play such an important role in protecting these large connected landscapes across the range countries.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, which may not be an easy one. What challenges do you see, this is for either of you, for tiger conservation in the future compared to the current challenges?
I'll start, and I'll just reiterate a point I made earlier. Political will, absolutely critical, right? If we can get better, stronger commitments at highest political levels in Southeast Asia, we will have made a step in the right direction. So that's fundamental. Long-term financing, again, covering the recurrent costs of protected areas that are critical for tigers to thrive is another challenge, but we're making progress there as well. Dechen, I'm sure, can add.
Yeah, I think, Ginette, you hit the important points there. I think the political will is so important, and resourcing, resourcing, if you look at the amount of resource that has gone into over the last 12 years, really, I think we need to really scale that resourcing in terms of having serious, conservation impacts at scale. And at the same time, and I would also like to sort of, again, further emphasize that I think one of the biggest threats still continues to remain is poaching and as Ginette mentioned in her slides, snaring in Southeast Asia. It is so indiscriminate and really wiping out wildlife species across these range states. And tiger is certainly hugely impacted by this. So I think illegal wildlife trade, poaching and snaring is something that we really need to address in the next 12 years as well, seriously.
Well, sadly, we've reached the end of our time together. So thank you to everyone for submitting such engaging questions. And special thanks again to Ginette and Dechen for sharing this incredible work with us.